To the war in Ukraine now, where Kyiv says Russia launched 17 attack drones and several missiles targeting the south of the country overnight. Officials say air defenses were able to down 14 of the drones and 2 guided air missiles. But Russia is not the only party in this conflict heavily relying on drone warfare. Ukraine is increasingly using domestically produced drones to strike back at Russia deep inside its own borders. On Tuesday, Ukrainian drones hit the central Tatarstan region, around 1,100 kilometers from the country's shared border, in one of the deepest Ukrainian attacks since Russia launched its full-scale invasion 2 years ago. Now, Kyiv said the attack hit a major oil refinery and a drone assembly factory. But how serious a threat are the Ukrainian drone attacks to Russia? DW's Kyiv correspondent Nick Connolly has more.
A light aircraft without a pilot, but stuffed with explosives, hits a Russian drone factory in Tatarstan, more than 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine. And it's not a one-off. Krasnodar, Ryazan, Samara, nowhere in the European part of Russia is safe from Ukrainian strikes. Russia, for its part, has always been able to hit anywhere in Ukraine with expensive Cold War-era ballistic missiles that were built to strike the US. But the sense that Ukraine could do something similar and hit Russia far from the front lines is new.
We don't have our own cruise missiles, our own ballistic missiles. What we do have is Western-supplied Storm Shadow or Scalp missiles, or ATACMS in small quantities. But we are only allowed to use them against Russian forces in Ukraine.
Ukraine began using its homemade drones to hit Russian oil facilities like these last year. While the geography of the strikes has expanded, the accuracy was still limited. Often enough, the drones reached their target but failed to make much of an impact. That's now changing.
There are grounds for optimism. We saw footage of a Ukrainian drone hitting a Russian oil refinery. You can see the drone closing in and making a turn to ensure it hit its target, the distillation column. That means some of these drones now have navigation systems that enable them to be maneuvered into their targets. They're similar, if cheaper, to what you'd see in a Storm Shadow cruise missile.
And it's working. Analysts say Russia's oil refining capacity has dropped by more than 10% since the latest round of Ukrainian drone strikes began early in January 2024. Ukraine is reducing Russia's oil exports to make it harder for Vladimir Putin to finance his war. But this is not only worrying people in the Kremlin. The Financial Times reported that Washington has requested Kyiv stop attacking Russian oil infrastructure, fearing these attacks could push prices up for US consumers and harm President Biden's chances of re-election. US officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, have made a point of stressing that their country has neither, quote, supported nor enabled Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. But Valery Romanenko isn't so sure.
I think these strikes wouldn't be possible without Western intelligence information that enables Ukraine to direct these drones around Russian air defenses. We're getting that information, and we're thankful for it.
For all the fear in Western capitals, these drone strikes could escalate or expand the scope of this war. Here in Ukraine, many feel they have little to lose. Their argument goes something like this. The West can't withhold military aid, while also asking Kyiv not to use what it has. Ukraine, they say, won't fight this war with one hand tied behind its back.
So how concerned should Moscow be about all of this? That's a question I put to military analyst Frank Ledwich.
At the tactical level, they're very serious, as you heard there from Mr. Romanenko, who outlined exactly how things are done and what they're done with. So, yes, they're causing damage, and you can see that when the American Secretary of State gets involved and the Financial Times is stating there's a strategic effect to it, there is that kind of effect as well. However, on the Russian war effort, it is, I think, right now at the level of just above nuisance. That's at the sort of highest level. However, Ukraine is really majoring on these assets. They have announced just earlier this year the formation, I think rightly, it's very innovative, of an unmanned systems force, a bit like the Space Force or the Air Force, a whole new service. So they're really majoring this. They see this as a massive competitive edge. And I would tend to agree. We've seen the effect they've had, of course, as well in the Black Sea.
So do you think they can help overcome Ukraine's disadvantage on the battlefield?
Yes, you're talking about essentially an asymmetric approach. In other words, Russia right now has the advantage of manpower and heavy materiel, but the effort being put into the drone program from Ukraine and its allies in what Zelensky's called the drone coalition, which includes many NATO countries, notably Britain and Germany, that's really ramping up and I don't think it's offsetting Russia's advantage on the battlefield yet, and I don't necessarily think it will on its own, but it's certainly a major factor right now in the war, as you can see.
The U.S., you mentioned the Secretary of State there, we heard him in the report, say they don't support nor enable Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory. Many other Ukrainian allies say the same, but realistically, would Ukraine even be able to attack Russia without the support of its allies?
You heard there from Valery Romanenko, it's entirely unrealistic to expect that Ukraine can or will be doing this on its own. There's huge intelligence and other forms of information going into Ukraine. Now, I've no doubt whatsoever that intelligence is used for targeting purposes. There may not be active assistance in the form of personnel, but in terms of intelligence, absolutely there is.